Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, talking about a little game that I've been getting a lot of requests to dive into. We're talking about Baldur's Gate 3, and a lot of you have been surprised about my lack of coverage for this game, and to that I do apologize, and I have an explanation. It was in an older video, but many of you may not have checked it out. So in 2020, when we got early access to Baldur's Gate 3, I sat down, I played for a couple of hours, put out my impressions, and said I immediately uninstalled. Not for the reason most gamers go, I immediately uninstalled. It's because Larian Studios is one of my favorite RPG developers, period, end of story. Divinity Original Sin 2, go play it if you have yet to, speaks for itself. And for me, with the love I have for that game, the love I have for Larian, and knowing that the early access was just going to be limited to Act 1, I thought, I'm gonna hold off until whenever this game is ready and then completely give myself away to it. The problem was I didn't plan for this little game, Baldur's Gate 3, and this other little game you may have heard of called Starfield releasing within the vicinity of one another. Now, fortunately, with the new release date being given to the PC version of Baldur's Gate 3, that's less of a problem for all of us. We at least get a nice month with what is basically Dungeons and Dragons, the game. So I want to talk about some of the major things that have stood out to me with Baldur's Gate 3 because I've been very quiet on this game for a while, and I know my audience knows I love role-playing games. I love choice and consequence. So Matty, talk about it, dang it. Well, I got you covered here today. Thank you so much for tuning in, lending me some of your time. If you are new here, you're into Baldur's Gate 3, I'll put in that review code request. I got a couple other videos in mind that I want to make for y'all, so consider subscribing. All right, I said earlier D&D the game. That's one of the main reasons I'm excited about it, right? I haven't played D&D in years, unfortunately, but I missed that tabletop-like experience where anything can happen. And obviously within a video game, there are limitations to anything can happen, and eventually it becomes more and more of an illusion. But the reason I have so much love and respect and admiration for Larian Studios is I felt like they were one of the first to truly break that mold and say, no, every playthrough can truly feel different. And that was with Divinity Original Sin 2. The classes, the set origin stories, just how much can happen within this world. And not only just in story and dialogue and delving into the lore, but more importantly, the tag system. As you make a similar type of choice over and over, your character becomes more defined, and that unlocks more choices, which I always thought was so rad. And even into the gameplay, where you can break the game's rule sets whenever. It's not just a game about dialogue and politics, it's about breaking all the rules and becoming this force of chaos that can change anything, kill anyone, and do anything. And these games feel like they're planned for anything I could ever conceive. So with Baldur's Gate 3, it feels like they're taking all of that and turning it up to 11. I mean, the hype is real. If you go over to Steam, at least recently, Baldur's Gate 3 is a top seller on Steam. Now, in fairness, I will say that there's not much happening right now, but Remnant 2 is coming out. That looks really good. There are other games coming out in August that could be a little more hype worthy for me. Like, I think of Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. I know that's lower on people's ladder, but for me, I'm like very excited for that. Point being though, is there's enough hype to put a Larian Studios game at #1 on Steam, and people are really behind this. Now, there's a reason why some of those pre-orders skyrocketed. We'll talk about that later, but I'm just happy to see them collecting already a massive W. I feel this team has been so beyond overlooked. You know, I'm actually surprised with how much YouTube coverage I've been seeing and how much conversation I'm seeing about this game, but it just goes to say to developers who were denying it, the love for RPGs is real. All right, so moving on, the other reason I'm just so excited about this game is it is, to me, personally, and I know for many of you, it's the Baldur's Gate sequel you never thought you'd get. I don't have much history. I don't have any history, actually, with Baldur's Gate. I never played 1. I never played 2. In fact, I have over my game shelf, let me grab it one moment, this dinky GameStop case, and inside here, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 Enhanced Edition. I remember going to GameStop because I wanted to make a review of these games the year that Baldur's Gate 3 came out. I didn't plan for such a chaotic year, so I never had the time, but I picked this up in 2020, funny enough, and I remember being there with my mom. We had to pick up from somewhere, and we were driving all over the place, but I said, I gotta make a stop at GameStop and make this pickup, because this was actually hard to find, and I gotta get the original case for this. But point being, I have very little experience with Baldur's Gate. What I do have a lot of experience with is Dragon Age, and that's what Baldur's Gate 3 reminds me of. My personal favorite Dragon Age game being Dragon Age Origins. To me, Baldur's Gate 3 looks like the Dragon Age Origins sequel I never got, and the people who are like me, we never got. And that makes me up the walls crazy excited. For those who don't remember, Dragon Age Origins starts off in the series as a tactical role-playing game. Take KOTOR's combat system, evolve it in meaningful ways, a lot more choices as well. Very bloody, very gory, very fantasy as well. It was wonderful. And you combine that with the origin stories where everyone has a different starting point, but they all coincide with the Grey Wardens in their own way. And it's just such a memorable video game. And with even Divinity Original Sin 2 and the ways that you can start the game and how people interact with you based off who you are, I get a lot of those vibes here from Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of Dragon Age, which again, I understand. It really started with Baldur's Gate, I know. But I'm saying for me, as someone who never played Baldur's Gate, my parallel is to Dragon Age Origins, where the Dragon Age series went more in that action direction. They did Dragon Age 2, which was just straight up an action game. Dragon Age Inquisition, in fairness, had a kind of melding of the two where it was action focused, but you could pause the action and get a little tactical. I personally never made use of that mechanic because I never thought there was a good time to pull it out. The point being, Dragon Age Origins, I just don't know why BioWare didn't sprint in that direction following the success of that game. But seeing Baldur's Gate 3 gain so much traction as this, it's like, yes, this is what I've always wanted. But it's not all just gab out there. There are numbers to support why people are getting excited, such as 170 hours of cinematics. Now, this doesn't mean the story you're going to play is going to be a 170-hour plus campaign. This is a combination of everything. And we'll get into this next number here on a little word of warning for those who may be getting overhyped. To me, I think that this is great because you see the upgraded production value. So even if it was 10 hours of cinematics, I'd be fine with that. Because truthfully, when you look at Divinity Original Sin, it's all top down. You can zoom in the camera and get a little bit close. But here in Baldur's Gate 3, with the way the camera's positioned, again, Dragon Age Origins energy through and through, it's just so much higher production values. And I think that's why it's drawing in a much larger crowd, because you're not just looking from the sky the entire game. Only so many people can tolerate that. But there's another number here to be aware of, which is 17,000 ending variations, which Larian did confirm this is true. Now, does this mean that there's spiderwebs among spiderwebs among spiderwebs with 17,000 plus different variations to your ending? No. Remember Fallout 3? Remember Todd Howard, where he said Fallout 3 had 200 plus endings, and people were like, oh my God. And we know Fallout 3 only has really a couple of endings. It's really permutations of that same ending, right? Where you'd see different things in that final slideshow. What did you do in certain quest lines? And the math behind it is all these various combinations in the end result. Think of that a lot of the same here with 17,000 ending variations. I said this in Defining Duke. I'll say it here. Look, if there were 5 ending variations, for many people that's not enough, but to me 5, that's plenty. Most RPG players only see 2. 17,000, oh, the writers just cooked. They just cooked, man. I cannot wrap my head around this being an actual number, but I must warn people not to not get hyped at all. But just know that this does mean it's got some of that Fallout 3 permutation energy. And there actually was a clarification that they gave Games Radar that you should be aware of. This came from the lead writer, where they talked about how it's a spider web of sorts, where there is the ending at the center of it, and then the start of the game is the outer edge. So you're always heading toward the same point, and what happens when you get there is very different, but it interweaves, so you're kind of dancing between plots. So the idea is there's going to be so many permutations of how you get to the ending as well as how the ending plays out, but it's not necessarily 17,000 distinct different endings. So just, again, be aware. That doesn't mean you should lessen your hype, because I think there are developers out there who would kill to reach like 1,000 variations, but it also speaks to why people love Larian. The reason I love them, they care about writing. I feel not enough big game developers care about good writing. I've critiqued it endlessly on this channel. And I am a writer myself, so I get I'm going to pay a little bit closer attention to it than maybe your average gamer, but I just find it at times such a race to the bottom on who can write a game the worst. And even writers who have, I gotta be real, failed before, I'm not calling for their jobs, but failed before getting bigger, crazier games to work on and writing those too. I'm just like, how is this happening? So when we see numbers like 170 hours of cinematics, we see 17,000 variations to the ending. The reason people are excited is not just the number alone, but it just says Larian Studios cares about writing. There was actually a great live stream clip I saw asking, why did Baldur's Gate 3 effectively deserve to exist? Like, how does it honor Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, which are tremendous, impactful role-playing games? And Sven, who is the studio head, gave a phenomenal, passionate, multi-minute speech on all of this. And again, it really spoke to who's behind this. And I just feel like you don't see that often enough. I always try to celebrate when I do. I talked about this with Todd Howard. I said how one thing I really liked about an interview he did recently when asked about doing small games is he said, no, I like the big games. I like to live in these worlds. And I just don't feel we hear that enough. We always hear about how, oh, AAA gaming, it's so difficult, it's so tiresome, it's crunchy, and I'm not trying to minimize all that, but it was nice to hear someone say, I like this, I want to be here. And I got this same energy with Sven. Like, I got this same energy of they were really passionate about this project, and I just love that they got to do this. And I'm happy that they managed to shake off what was the initial conversation in 2020. I remember making my only, I think, second Baldur's Gate 3 video, which was, you know, answering people's questions. Is it Divinity Original Sin 2? Is it just more of that? And yeah, you'll see pieces of it there for sure, but if it's not broken, don't fix it. Like, Divinity Original Sin 2 is some of the cream of the crop in RPG gameplay. And so now they're just going to go hog wild with story and choices and whatnot. I mean, I can't wait. And then the reason these numbers are popping off in the terms of Steam sales, like I mentioned earlier, the last thing I got to get into, bear romance. Now, I've spoken at length about video game romance and my stance on it. I think of, spoiler warning for a game that's 20 years old, Knights of the Old Republic. I think of that as romance done really well. I think of how Bastila and Revan, how they come together, where Bastila is this immature, prideful youth who then falls, and you're not necessarily her knight in shining armor when you find her and you try to bring her back, or you can naturally kill her, but you pull her out of this rut against pretty much the Jedi Order's code and swear your love to one another, and that's how you save her from the darkest parts of herself. And I remember as a kid playing that for the first time, and was that my intellectual takeaway at the time? No, definitely not. But that was a love story that really gelled with me, and maybe it's because it was my first introduction to that. That's what I look for, that kind of thought, that kind of impact, where I feel like nowadays it's like Cyberpunk 2077, where they're, oh, let's get physics on all the genitalia, that'll be cool. And it sells, there's no denying it, but I always laugh when I see these things because I understand the intent behind the developers to win some headlines, and it works. But there actually is a pretty interesting reasoning behind the bear romance scene, which Polygon covered, and it's that Halsin, who is the druid that you can romance, can transform into a powerful bear in combat. The trick is that Halsin also finds it difficult to maintain his human form when he's in moments of strong emotion. There is a solid romantic novel premise there, a man who is so overcome with love that he's quite literally become feral. So yeah, I mean, people love romance in video games. I'm very hot and cold on all of it. but there are good ones. I think of other well-told romance stories, maybe not ones you're a part of, like Parvati, where you see her in the outer worlds finding love in a very unique way. And so I like those types of stories that do it differently. So yeah, bear romance, very different, very new, but it actually went so viral for Larian that they got banned off TikTok, and this only fueled the fire more. So there's a lot of excitement for Baldur's Gate 3, rightfully so, and I just can't wait to get my hands on this one, ladies and gentlemen. So I wanted to share some thoughts and just dive deep into BG3 before hopefully I get to review it. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to take excellent care of yourself. So with that, I will talk to you in the next video. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the hell out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.